The Business of Biotech is produced by Life Science Connect and its community of learning, solving, and sourcing resources for biopharma decision makers. If you're working on biologics process development and manufacturing challenges, you need to swing by bioprocessonline.com. If you're trying to stay ahead of the cell or gene therapy curve, visit cellandgene.com. When it's time to map out your clinical course, let clinicalleader.com help. And if optimizing outsourcing decisions is what you're after, check out outsourcepharma.com. We're Life Science Connect, and we're here to help. When my buddy Allan Shaw says, hey, there's someone you should have on your show, he gets my attention because he's usually right about this Business of Biotech stuff. When he says this guy turns stuff he touches into gold, I'll admit I get a little skeptical, but then again, Allan's never given me a bum steer. I'm Matt Pillar. This is the Business of Biotech, and I'm pretty sure I've already made today's guest a little uncomfortable, but Nouhad Husseini deserves that high praise. As SVP and head of business development and corporate strategy at Regeneron, he's established and orchestrated a pretty solid record of winning strategic collaborations and licensing deals. On today's episode, we're going to get to know Nouhad, and we're going to learn as much as we can about strategic partnership success in biopharma. Nouhad, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
Nothing like putting you on a pedestal from the outset, right?
Well, yeah, turning things into gold, that's about as high a bar as you can strive for, I guess. I'm still trying to do that, but
well,
nice like I'm capable of that.
Yeah. Well, like I said, Allan speaks super highly of you, and I trust his word. So I want to begin by getting to know your pedigree, your background a little bit, and sort of the mix that set you up for the position you're in today and the work that you're doing. And if I go back to college, your college years, you graduated from Princeton with a BA in molecular biology, and then made the transition into investment banking and equity research at Robertson Stephens and Morgan Stanley. So whenever I see that sort of transition, from like a science-y sort of undergrad or academia into investment banking or equities, it makes me curious about sort of where your head was at during that time, what your strategic sort of approach was.
Well, I guess I wish I was more strategic back in those days. That definitely, there was no strategy involved here. It was, when I was 18 or so, kind of starting my world in molecular biology, I didn't really know anything else. I thought I was going to grow up to be a scientist. That was just kind of what I did and what I liked doing. And I was, planning to go to a PhD program or maybe an MD PhD or something like this. And it was, I think, in my junior year, we had to spend a year in the lab, really kind of getting our hands dirty with a full-on, thesis project that eventually we'd try to publish. And it was like a legitimate, research endeavor, partnering with one of the faculty members at the university. And that was a disaster on many different levels. One, I learned that I just really wasn't very good at the practice of science as much as I loved it. And I actually didn't really enjoy the laboratory experience, just in terms of the individual nature, at least the way it wasn't very much of a team sport. I would go into the lab and set up my experiments, wait a couple of days, cross my fingers, hope they worked. Usually they didn't, I'd have to repeat them. And I found that process to be a little demoralizing and not very, rewarding. So it was kind of an, oh crap kind of moment. Now what am I going to do with myself, that this isn't the path that I thought I was going to be on? And then I kind of figured out, okay, what am I going to do next? And a lot of my friends, a lot of my classmates had kind of run off to Wall Street, which was not atypical for kind of Ivy League undergrads to just go do that for a couple of years. And so I figured, what the hell, I'll give that a try. Mm-hmm. Actually, Allan Shaw, one of his friends, a guy named Mark Simon, who was a well-known person in biopharma, one of the early bankers and researchers in the field back in the 90s. Maybe Mark. He had hired me. And kind of took a chance on someone with literally no business experience, just as someone who was hungry and wanted to learn. So I was lucky enough to get that opportunity to kind of co-work with Mark and his team at Robertson Stephens. And back in 2000, when this all happened, these were the days when biotech was kind of booming around the sequencing of the human genome. And it was just a really exciting time. Companies were raising lots of money, and it was a great time for me to kind of enter the field and just start, drinking from the fire hose, as they say.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I ended up there.
That's
Almost
great.
back.
You made it, you made it through those labs further than I did when I was in my undergrad. I think it was my freshman year. I was undeclared, undecided. And I was taking a class called anatomical physiology, a very, very basic sort of anatomy class. And there was a lab for that class. It was when they wheeled the cadaver in for that lab that I said, nope, sciences are not for me. I'm not going to go that route. Do you find yourself and especially like early on, like when you got into the investment scene, did you find yourself leaning at all into your molecular biology background or knowledge, or like did you find that advantageous having that background?
Yeah, I mean, it has proven advantageous for sure. But I mean, early on in my career, I could not be more green, in terms of just understanding business, finance, and even just the industry. I mean, what you learn in the lab about how enzymes work and DNA and the biochemistry of amino acids, et cetera, just that has no applicability to the world of clinical trials and the FDA and intellectual property and, Medicare reimbursement dynamics and J codes, all these things that, drive stocks of publicly traded companies. And so that was, a just crazy learning experience. As I've gone through my career, for sure, that foundation, I've kind of looked back on that, and it gives me the vocabulary and the basic understanding of where I can kind of ask intelligent questions about mechanisms of action and areas of science and target biology. It gives me the ability to ask better questions and understand the answers. I'm by no means an expert, but it's been a big advantage, I think, over the years.
Yeah. When you added a Wharton MBA in 2004, at that point, was there, I guess, a little more intentionality behind where Nouhad wanted to take his career?
A little bit, but not really. I mean, to be honest, I mean, I was still at a crossroads of, do I stay in, like financial services or investing, right? That was kind of I was at this moment, I could go work at a hedge fund. And I just thought that was pretty exciting because, I'm sure you meet a lot of these folks. I mean, these are the kind of the smartest of the smart in terms of people that are in our industry, just incredibly bright, high energy people. And I just was amazed by these people as a young professional and wanted to be part of that. Mm-hmm. And so I thought maybe that was a path I might just continue down because that's kind of where I started. But then there was a big part of me that wanted to be part of a mission-driven, more of a team, building something, building an organization. And I wanted to at least have that experience and give that a shot. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and as a kid, even then I kind of knew of Genentech, partly because some of my friends, their parents worked at Genentech. It was a kind of a known entity, at least in my sphere. And I always thought of Genentech as like this, amazing place, the pinnacle of really biotech, which it was in a lot of ways in the 90s and early 2000s. And so I kind of had that in my head. When I went to Wharton, I had this goal. I said, all right, I'm going to Genentech after Wharton. That's the reason I'm signing up for Wharton. So let's see if that works out. And I actually applied for an internship that summer at Genentech and got denied. And I was devastated. And I was like, oh my God, this whole reason I went to Wharton to end up at Genentech, this may not happen. I ended up at Amgen over that summer and had a good experience there. And fortunately, when I graduated, I just kind of said, I'm putting all my cards on the table. I'm applying to Genentech and only Genentech. Please give me an offer. Yeah. And fortunately, I did. And I did end up back in California after school. So that was really the only intentionality to it, was to kind of, pivot, into industry and specifically at Genentech.
Yeah. What did you want to, at that point, what did you want to do at Genentech? What did you envision yourself doing when you set foot in there?
That's a good question. I didn't even know, because I was just ignorant to really what the roles and career paths even were in biopharma. I wasn't one of these people that had a lot of mentors, at a young age. I didn't know people in industry. My family wasn't part of the industry, nothing like that. So I had no clue, even what people did. I didn't know what business development really was. I didn't know the different functions within finance. I didn't know really what the difference between marketing and market access and pipeline planning and portfolio planning and all these different functions. So part of my goal, when I went in industry, was just to expose myself to what is out there, and that's part of the career advice I give to a lot of now younger people entering the workforce is take a couple of years and just explore and figure out what you don't even know is there for you, So I was fortunate enough to be part of a rotational program that Genentech had set up that allowed me to kind of move through a bunch of these different functions. And through that experience, I think it quickly kind of realized that business development was really kind of the path I wanted to be on. Almost, it was just, that was one of the few places where a business person like me could be super close to the science and occasionally flex some scientific muscle, and which is what I really wanted. When I was in marketing teams and in finance teams, sometimes I was feeling like, I could be working at Pepsi and it wouldn't really be all that different, whereas in business development, I'm sitting here back to what I kind of thought about and knew and enjoyed when I was in the equity research world, thinking about science and medicine and trials and data analysis. And, that's really kind of got me jazzed up.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you think about that stuff, in the context of a business development role, you think about it. I mean, I almost picture it. Correct me if I'm wrong here. Like, tell me if this is way off base. But I almost picture it like from a biz dev perspective. When you're studying all those spaces, you're looking at all these different parts and pieces, like puzzle pieces, to determine what might fit within the next steps at your company or the portfolio of your company. Like, what's sort of the mindset there? Like, you're I guess the fact that you were jazzed about the opportunity to look at science and medicine and clinical trials. In those early days, what did you learn about, like, to what end? To what end are you doing that?
I mean, it sounds, I guess, a little cliche, but I mean, I think it was very real, and it motivated me and motivated a lot of people, was just this feeling of like, hey, this technology, it's probably not going to work. But if it did, man, the impact of being able to cure this disease, or the impact it's going to have on the world. And while I might play some small part in that, and just that feeling, even though it is a teensy part of like actually seeing something come to the patients, it's still a role in doing something that like has this amazing impact on the world and a lasting impact. So like that emotional piece of it and that satisfaction was like really got me excited, just to be in a room and sitting here like, if we're going to cure cancer, right? It's like, it might happen, in this room, and I'm part of that team, even if in a small way. And it just was, that opportunity felt special.
Yeah. You developed this, as I said, intentionality to join Genentech, to go to Genentech. You made that happen. You're at Genentech, and then in 2011, you joined Regeneron. Was that the transition? Did you go from Genentech to Regeneron in 2011, or was there something in between?
Oh, that was it. Yeah,
it was it. Yeah. So why'd you wanted so badly to be at Genentech in your formative years? Why'd you leave?
Well, it was not part of the plan, believe me. It was, and also being in San Francisco, right? We were there. My wife and I had moved there. We just had our first two children, or only two, but they were just born. And it was home. It's like, okay, I'm back in California. This is biotech hotspot. I'm at the greatest company in biotech. Like, why would I ever leave? This is like mission accomplished in terms of my early, life goals. But stuff happens, right? I mean, it's like, opportunities come your way. And I guess the constellation of events that kind of came together, I mean, maybe one of the big ones was the acquisition of Genentech by Roche. So, when that happens, companies change, people that I really enjoyed working with leave, culture changes. That was part of it. Part of it also was, I had been doing the job for, 2 or 3 years as a junior person, learning. And I was ready, to kind of challenge myself, take that next step, be a bigger fish in a small pond, that kind of thing. So I just felt kind of hungry to do more in terms of my own personal role. And then there was a personal connection I actually had at Regeneron. A guy I used to work with on Wall Street at Morgan Stanley, a guy by the name of Michael Aberman. He had joined Regeneron about a year prior. He had been a successful equity analyst and was one of the very first equity analysts to kind of leave Wall Street to go work for a company. It kind of started a trend. He was a trend. But Michael I had known him and always had tremendous respect for him. And when he reached out and said, "Hey, we're looking for someone," if it had been someone other than Michael, I probably wouldn't have been so interested. But you know how things are in life; it's about people. And when Michael reached out, I was like, "Oh, okay, working for you? That's something I would seriously consider doing." And then the last thing, I had known Regeneron well, just from covering them as an analyst. I knew the company from afar, at least. And then even within Genentech, there were a couple of interesting moments that kind of always put Regeneron back on my radar screen as like this force to be reckoned with and this potentially, super exciting company to be part of. We were sitting in meetings talking about Lucentis, the retina product from Genentech. And I remember sitting in there and listening to the team, and the team was like, there's this little company called Regeneron with this VEGF trap thing. And we think we should be pretty worried about it because these guys invented a really good molecule and they're doing a good job with the development. So I just put it in my head. I'm like, oh, these Regeneron guys, Genentech respects them. And then there was another moment where people were talking about, Genentech wants to get into PCSK9. And, these Regeneron guys, they're leading the way there. I'm like, oh, again, Regeneron again? Mm-hmm. And then this antibody technology. Genentech needs to up their game in antibody technology. You know what we should do? Let's call Regeneron because they got Regeneron again. So it was like in my head that these guys at Regeneron were really onto something big. And so that was exciting. Like, can I go to a small company that I thought was just on the verge of some, exciting growth?
Yeah, and it was, and we're going to get into that next. But before we do, you mentioned something just a minute ago about sort of this trend, this trend of the departure from Wall Street and working in biz dev for a biopharma. Tell me about that transition. Like what I don't know, just give us some highlights on sort of the differences and sort of what that transition required and felt like, because you're right. I mean, we see quite a bit of that. And I'm just curious about like the work that you're doing now, how that differs from your time on Wall Street and what you lean into or, take away from that Wall Street experience that serves you well today.
I mean, in a lot of ways, it's like the exact same discipline. Right, where you need to look at all these different factors: scientific, business, legal, macro, competitive landscape, synthesize that all together. In one case, it's an investment thesis, right? Do I think I want to invest in the stock and the equity of this company? And the other, it's an investment thesis. Do I want to invest in the product, in the drug? And so the analysis and the data you look at and the process you go through and the diligence and the modeling, like it's really the same discipline in a lot of ways. So that was very comfortable and I could lean on that. And so that gets you to the decision point. From there, it really diverges a lot. I mean, because then you get into the transaction aspects of it and the deal-making aspects of it and the negotiation aspects of it, which is a whole nother art, that you need to learn and I needed to learn and I'm continuing to learn. I mean, that's one of the fun parts of the job is you never really master that aspect of deal-making. And it's always a different deal, always a different set of counterparties, different issues come up. But that is something that, life in Wall Street cannot and does not, prepare you for, how to learn that art of the, deal making and the transaction, technical points.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, let me stay there for a minute. When you look at the potential for a deal, we'll use deal. I mean, I'm going to get to the question where I kind of want to learn your vernacular, and I want to learn sort of like what you name the quivers or the arrows that is in your quiver. When you're looking at a potential deal, do you typically treat it sort of as a custom exploratory, let's see where this ends up sort of thing, or do you have sort of structured approaches, whether that's a licensing deal or an acquisition, or do you go into it with sort of intentional plans, drawing from the tools that, I don't know, I'm using a lot of words here, but drawing from the arrows in your quiver that have been maybe tried and true and proven, or is it truly sort of ad hoc? Let's see where this ends up and what makes the most sense.
For me,
it's a pretty sloppy question, isn't it?
No, I know what you're getting. I know what you're getting at. At least I think I do. For me, it's more, I would say 80-20 of trying to leverage and utilize prior experience, knowledge, deal models, and apply those. Versus the truly let's just sit down and make it up as we go along. Mm-hmm. I would say that maybe is a non-traditional answer. I think most people in my seat would kind of say, oh no, we do everything bespoke and from first principles. But I don't know. I mean, there really are certain deals. Again, it all starts with, what are you trying to get out of this deal, right? What are they trying to get out of it? What are we trying to get out of it? And you can kind of know that, pretty early on. And, things fit patterns, and we know the type of deal. Like if we're doing a deal to collaborate around, let's run a clinical trial that tests the combination of our PD-1 inhibitor with some novel agent that this company has, as an example.
Mm-hmm.
We've done 10 of those types of deals. So when that's the deal, you kind of know what the issues are and how to make that deal successful. And you want to learn, based on past experiences, like what worked in these prior models and how to optimize that. So that's kind of how I start, is like, let me understand what we're trying to get at, and I have a solution for that. And then I try, sometimes that is a shortcoming of mine. I kind of get stuck in these mental traps of being a little bit too wedded to prior, models. And I always try to step back and say, okay, let's just let that go and let's try something new. Occasionally we've done deals that like are fairly unprecedented, for the company, or just, generally speaking, the industry, where we're kind of making things up as we go. Those are fun. I enjoy doing those. It's not that I try to avoid that, but that just is like a situation when we're really trying to achieve something that's kind of unusual,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Describe Regeneron when you came on the scene, I guess from a business development perspective, when you came on scene in 2011. Like what did you walk into?
Well, I mean, I knew what I was walking into, I guess. I think I did, which was a company that really didn't need to do any business development. So it was kind of a strange job to be taking up this head of business development type role where the company wasn't doing any business development. And what I mean by that is that, they had done a really one of a kind type of deal with Sanofi back, I think it was 2007. Which essentially just fully financed the company and its R&D for the next decade, right? Which was highly unusual for a company at that stage. So there was no more deal making that had to happen to keep the lights on, right? Which is what typically small biotechs are doing, selling asset here. They didn't have to do that anymore. So they were kind of done, box checked. Then the other kind of deal was like, well, let's buy other people's stuff. Regeneron didn't need to do that because Sanofi just gave them billions of dollars to basically turn the crank on the antibody discovery platform, this VelociSuite technology that Regeneron had invented. And so they were more than busy, just trying to generate clinical candidates, and there was no need to bring other stuff in. So that was going on. That was just the business reality. And then there was also just more of a cultural reality, which was Regeneron had been around for 25 years. This was not some startup new company. And the leadership and many of the employees had been there from the early days. So there was this deeply, deeply ingrained culture of how things were done for 20 years. And for 20 years, there wasn't a lot of external innovation as like a core part of the strategy. So there was a big need to try to, influence the hearts and minds and open people's eyes that, hey, guys, we're kind of at a stage now where, it didn't make sense over the last 25 years that, that was perfectly appropriate to be laser focused on internal stuff. The company's evolving. We're getting ready to launch our first major commercial product in Intellia. We're growing in financial resources, capabilities, clinical resources, our regulatory expertise, everything. Like we're big boys now, or we're trying to become big boys, so we need to change our thinking. And so I kind of walked into that moment of the company. And that's kind of what I spent doing the first, 2 or 3 years, through a lot of just trial and error and exposing people to different companies and banging my head against the wall. Just trying to get people to see and appreciate, what is even out there, right? Because people weren't even really looking, And so as people started to be getting more and more exposed to this, and we had a couple small early wins, it was kind of the experience like, oh, this is actually kind of interesting. I like this. I can see the benefit of doing more of this stuff. And it just kind of slowly, snowballed slowly, over time until kind of where we are now.
What does that motivation look like? I mean, you bring up a really good point. When you're a small biotech, and the cash runway is running short, and you need some money. You need maybe a partnership or a licensing deal creates an opportunity to demonstrate some validation. Like there's very clear, I think, scenarios for new small, early clinical stage biotechs to seek partnership, to sell asset, whatever. Like it's a very, it's often directive. Like we need to do this to do the next thing we want to do. in a company like Regeneron, when you walked in, to your point, like flush with cash, commercial, just about commercial stage, right? Like things are going well. What is the motivation? Like, or what was the motivation at that point to, I guess, invest in business development, invest in a role like yours?
Well, again, what was unusual about the role and what attracted me to it, frankly, was the company was at the stage where it was doing transactions on the sell side still as a small loss-making company, and also emerging to be on the buy side. So it was kind of both sides of the deal-making table, which is pretty unusual, and was like exciting for me as a deal maker to want to be able to have that variety of different kind of things to think about and work on. So on the sell side of things, I mean, at the time in the early days that I was there, when Eylea was just getting launched, there really was not. I mean, you sure people tell different versions of history, but my recollection was nobody was going to say Eylea was going to be a $10 billion product, right? If it was going to be $1 billion product, we were going to jump up and down and give each other high fives as a huge success. So at that time, there was still this big notion of, let's make sure we don't bite off more than we can chew. Right, as a company, let's not overinvest in big trials for some of our pipeline, and so let's find partners to help us share that risk and share that burden. Because again, we just don't want to get too bullish about our future that we wake up and say, "Oh my God, we just overdid it." So that was part of the motivation to continue to be on the quote sell side and find partners for some of our products and bring in other sources of funds. On the buy side, again, my motivation, and it wasn't the organization's motivation. It was kind of like we needed to bring people along to this kind of thinking. It was with a very long time horizon in mind, which, and my kind of thinking at the time was, look, Regeneron at that point in time, I think what most people would acknowledge was the world leader in antibody technology and capabilities. I mean, there were other people in the game, but it really had distinguished itself as really proven the best quality antibodies, the fastest turnaround times, blah blah blah, et cetera, et cetera. And the thinking was, let's leverage that and turn that crank and turn that into the most value and most drugs that we possibly can, which was correct. But I think that, one of the mistakes companies make and at risk is you get so focused on executing on kind of the here and now stuff, you kind of forget about investing in, well, what's going to be that thing in 10 years from now, because the world catches up to you. That's just the nature of our industry. When you have a technology as successful as what, Regeneron's VelociHume technology was, there's going to be people that come in and copycat and try to follow what you do, and inevitably there's it becomes commoditized. Are we there today? I don't know, but we're getting close, right? And so that's the nature of competition in technology. It's unavoidable. Yeah. And so for me, it was really like we need to not lose sight of that, but we need to start positioning ourselves for what is going to be the next VelocImmune-like super platform that Regeneron is leading the way in 10 years from now. And you got to make those investments along the way now and start planting those seeds. And so that was a lot of motivated kind of my early thinking was, what are those areas we need to start, planting seeds into so we can wake up in 2023 and be a real player in kind of a new field beyond antibodies.
Yeah. Is it the same team on the buy and sell side at Regeneron, and is it typical for like the same team to work on buy and sell side transactions?
Well, I mean, it's atypical for companies to even do both of those. I mean, big pharma for sure does, divestitures, right? Cleaning the portfolio. We've shelved this program, and I don't have a lot of visibility into how they organize that. I believe most of those guys have dedicated groups that are just out there shopping the garage sale stuff they don't want anymore.
Yeah.
So the way we do it at Regeneron, which was kind of how I learned it at Genentech, frankly, and maybe why we do it this way, is we have one team that kind of does everything. We do the scouting, we do the due diligence, we do the negotiations, we do the internal strategy. And part of it is just to have that continuity throughout the process, so you don't lose stuff when you're passing the baton from kind of one, silo to the next. And part of it is necessity, just because we're a lean and mean company. We can't afford to have 50 people in business development and have 10 scouts and 10 due diligence leads. So that's atypical. Most of our bigger peers, are more siloed and expert in how they organize their BD teams.
When it comes to turning your innovations into clinical realities, the first step is transforming your process. On the Business of Biotech podcast, we bring emerging biotechs weekly insights to advance their pipelines, from funding to regulatory and other need-to-know topics. The pod is brought to you in collaboration with Cytiva, a global provider of technologies and services that advance and accelerate the development, manufacture, and delivery of therapeutics. Check out their resources at cytiva.com/emerging biotech. That's CYTIVA.com/emerging biotech. So you talked about, like on the buy side, you talked about pipeline, like longer term pipeline development and asset acquisition and making sure that you've got, stuff to work on the next big thing 10 years down the road. But we know in biopharma that pipelines, they turn over, assets come and assets go. As that happens, sort of the normal cyclical playing out of the science and the clinical trials and the money that dictate sort of what assets remain in the pipeline and what don't. What else creates like I guess a catalyst for you to go out on the buy side to go out and hunt? Like I'm just looking for, I guess, like other indicators of partnership necessity or buy necessity.
Yeah, I mean, well, necessity is an interesting word. I mean, that's kind of where I was going to go with the answer. I mean, sometimes deals are motivated by necessity, right? There is a gap, or there is a revenue goal, or there's a therapeutic area leadership, whatever, right? And you're trying to get somewhere. And in order to get there, there's a necessity, to acquire something because the internal stuff or perceived necessity, right? And that motivates a lot of, deal making for sure. That is not really how we organize ourselves and even run the company in a grander sense. We don't really have long-term 5-year financial goals or pipeline goals. I mean, Regeneron's strategy is follow the science. And we kind of really mean that in the sense that we invent a lot of drugs. We don't even know which ones are going to really work. We look at the data, we decide which ones to invest in, not based on some grand overarching therapeutic area strategy. It's just, this drug looks like it's going to work and help the most people, so let's do that one. It's really not this big top-down master plan. It is purely, let's look at data together and figure out what those data tell us to do, which has us running in all kinds of crazy directions. And it's difficult to manage a company that way. But, you got to give credit to our leadership over the years. They've done a pretty impressive job. So what does motivate our deal making is a little less about necessity. It's kind of more about being opportunistic and looking at what is it that we are doing maybe better than the rest of the world. Like as an example, 5 years ago, maybe it was 8 years ago, I can't remember now, we made this decision to invest in a dramatic way in human genetic sequencing. And the vision was like, let's not dabble. We want Regeneron to be the number one place in the world in terms of, numbers of samples, quality of data, access to patient data, and let's make the greatest discoveries based on large-scale human genome sequencing. And we've done that. I don't know, we're number one, number two, wherever we are. I mean, it's like we're at the top of the world now. Mm-hmm. So some of the deal-making stuff comes from, okay, now that we're there, we have this resource, this asset, this capability. Can we be opportunistic and think about how do we leverage that? And that led us into things like gene editing and RNAi as modalities to drug some of these novel targets that come out of that. It led to, a lot of conversations. We did one transaction with AstraZeneca as an example to discover, small molecules against a novel target. How do we take advantage of this unique, these genetic targets and turn them into drugs through interesting collaborations? So it's kind of this necessity versus opportunism, which we end up playing a lot more in this kind of opportunistic mindset than a lot of our peers do.
Do you find yourself constantly being courted? Like, are you like constantly being courted by companies who want to offload assets or partner or be acquired wholesale?
It's interesting. Yes, but I don't know how that compares to, my peers at Amgen or J&J. Sometimes I wonder they probably get 10 times as much as we do.
Yeah.
I mean, Regeneron has a reputation and like rightly earned. We're not out there like shopping and buying other people's stuff. That's not, we don't sit here and say we have an aspiration for our pipeline to be, 55% sourced through external innovation, which a lot of other CEOs say, with pride. That is a good badge of honor. Look how good we are of accessing external innovation. We're kind of the opposite. If you listen to, Len and George talk, it's homegrown assets, and we're very proud of what we've generated. So, we have this reputation, and in practice, like we're not out there shopping much and buying much, and people know that. So, we get people approach us for sure, but I'm sure it's nowhere near what we would get if we were big spenders like, the Gileads and Celgenes used to be.
Yeah. Yeah. When you do enter into a partnership agreement, I want to talk about some nuts and bolts, maybe some mechanics. Like what is that? And again, I know, as we've ascertained, there are plenty of different recipes, plenty of different scenarios. But what are some of the, I guess, basic kind of bolted down contractual, partnership contractual elements that are common?
I mean, semantics is like, I find that to be kind of sometimes frustrating when we talk about these deals. Is this a out licensing, in licensing? Is this a collaboration? What is this thing? So I tend to try to not use that type of verbiage because that's not a great descriptor for what's really going on. Some of them are kind of loaded terms, I find. So we were talking the other day with some of our senior R&D guys, and we're saying, hey, we're thinking about an out licensing deal for Project X. And people, out licensing deal? No, what are you talking about? No, we want to be involved in that program. Don't out license it. I'm like, no, that's not what I meant. I meant we're going to find a partner who we're going to grant a license to conduct certain activities, blah, blah, just relax, Yeah. So these are kind of, loaded terms. That's why I try not to use them, or at least encourage people to think a little bit more sophisticated, Lee, about what's really going on. So like, for example, like when I look at these deals, and this is technical stuff, and that's why it's hard for lay people, and you can't even see that sometimes these deals aren't even made public because a lot of these contracts are redacted, or people aren't going to take the time to download a filed transaction agreement from some 10Q. But the things that I think really matter that kind of put these transactions into different categories and different buckets, it really boils down to which party in that transaction has the contractual obligation, meaning if they don't do it, they're going to get sued, to do stuff. Who has to use commercially reasonable efforts to develop and commercialize the drug, right? That one party will be assigned that obligation, right? And that is the lead party in the deal, right? Whether that's an in-license, out-license, because what licensing means, right? Licensing just means I wrote down on this piece of paper, you're allowed to do activity A, B, and C, and I won't sue you. Mm-hmm. Right? And these are the activities I'm licensing you to do that I'm not going to sue you over. Okay. Yeah. And there's licenses that go in every direction because parties are all doing different things, and you need these licenses to do things. So I don't even really look at that so much as the license grants. To me, it's who has the obligation contractually to do things, right? To devote resources, to be diligent, to execute stuff. Like that's really important. The other is decision-making, right? The governance, right? It's like at the end of the day, everyone says, well, we're going to sit down and we're going to agree on what to do, but always, maybe 1 out of 100 times, there's an exception, but 99 out of 100, one party at the end of the day gets to decide what to do. If there's a dispute over the budget, there's a dispute over a plan, you escalate it, whatever, someone ends up deciding. If you can't function without, you can't really live with this stalemate. Sometimes you see deals with that, but again, it's weird and it's very rare. And so that, really, I look at that, okay? Who really is the final say at the end of the day? That really matters a lot to me in terms of, what the deal is, right? And then it's just, are there even, in the last bucket is like, are there even ongoing activities by the seller, right? Because the seller sometimes is like, hey, here's a license to my patent, right? Run with it. You guys don't need us anymore. You know how to synthesize this thing. You know how to conjugate this thing. I'm doing nothing. I just am I'm just collecting a check. And, that to me matters in terms of, is this really a collaboration, right? The word collaboration gets thrown around a lot.
Yeah.
But to me, what collaboration means is the seller is actually doing stuff of real importance and criticality to the project. And that's not always the case, right? Because when we want to do a collaboration, then we need to really look hard at the people, who's going to be doing the work? What's their track record? Do they have the resources? Do they have the aligned vision, or they got 50 other things they want to be doing? Are they motivated? But if it's not a collaboration because they're not doing anything, then that stuff doesn't matter. Right. Then it's about like, how good is the technology? What kind of deal are we getting? Are there other risks? What's, blah, blah, blah. So like those three, I guess, I don't know, dimensions to me, if you study a deal and you think about it that way, it's a much more, clear way to think about what's really going on in this deal.
Yeah. Yeah. How much foresight do you apply? Like you talk about collaboration and what collaboration truly means. And if the seller isn't really collaborating, is that a potential pitfall where you can find yourself in a bad deal? Like in other words, like, there's a intended, obviously an intended outcome to this partnership, this collaboration. And should we go commercial, should there be a ton of money to be made on this collaboration, but the collaboration isn't a truly collaboration. Like, does that sit wrong?
No, I don't think so. I think a lot of it, where things get screwed up is misaligned expectations, like in so many things in life. People enter into these deals thinking it's going to go one way. And we thought we had this agreement at the beginning that this is how it's going to all work out. And it turns out like, oh, no, actually, I had a very different intention. I never intended for you guys to play a big role here. We were always going to lead this particular activity. And when you get that kind of misalignment of what people thought they were either buying or getting in return and what they actually get, like that's when the friction really starts happening. And that's something I see all the time, that doesn't get enough attention, time. Is just like, let's just get managements together. Let's just go through this somewhat mundane activity of, why are we doing this? Can we all just be on the same page? What are we trying to achieve? Because sometimes you start running, you do the deal, you run into it, and you find out, wait, we weren't even really on the same page all along.
Yeah.
So that's a big one for sure. It's just the misalignment of, expectations more than anything.
Well, how involved are you, like sort of post contractually? How involved do you remain in collaborative, whatever word you want to ascribe to it, right? Strategic collaborations or partnerships or whatever.
Not very much. I mean, like most groups, we have a dedicated function. It's like a full-time job. It's just to make sure these collaborations work well and we're communicating and everyone's doing what they're supposed to be doing and resolving dispute. I mean, that really is a full-time job and takes a dedicated set of expertise. Having said that, these deals are, living things. Things change, people change, data emerges. We want to do this. Oh, we never contemplated, that this would ever happen. Good, sometimes bad. You want to expand, you need to, shut down. So that was one interesting learning for me, just in my career, is just, you do these deals and they never stop evolving and, living. And so in some ways, it's when those moments happen, when it's like, hey, we need to pivot. We need to reassess this, where, I or my team will get back involved and try to think about how to revise the deal, how to improve the deal,
What have those experiences taught you about the actual business development part of it, like the way earlier stage? How have those experiences sort of formed up or shaped your approach, pre-deal?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like what are you looking for? What have you learned to look for or to be on the lookout for?
Well, I mean, when you're doing these deals, and certainly in my early days, I had this strong tendency, and there's always this tendency as a deal maker to try to think about, when you're sitting down writing these contracts, what are all these different scenarios? What could happen? And how do we contemplate that? How do we solve for that? What if, in these corner cases, like that terminology gets used all the time in deal making. Oh, this is a corner case. Stop solving for the corner case. And
well, for those of us who aren't deal makers, describe a corner case. What
I don't even know where the heck that terminology comes. I think it's a consulting term, but like what it means is like, I guess if you think about a box of possible outcomes, like it's way in the corner, like it's highly unlikely to ever occur. That's what it means.
All right.
Yeah. It's funny because I hear that's thrown around so often. I assume that everybody just uses that word all the time in their everyday life.
I make no assumptions.
No, I'm sure some consultant invented that word once upon a time. So we'll blame McKinsey or whoever, BCG, for that. All but my point is, there's this tendency often in deal making to try to solve for every eventuality, every corner case, whatever, which great, fantastic. If you can try to do that, like great, it paves the way in the future. But what I've learned, to your question is like, that's impossible. And it's a waste of time. And in many ways, it's counterproductive to kind of getting the deal done in the first place, because these deals have a cadence, they have a momentum, they have an energy. And just like anyone who's done deals, buying a house or whatever, time is your enemy, right? People lose interest, they get distracted, other things, look interesting to them. So when you spend, 9 months trying to solve every possible little scenario, which none of them are going to likely happen, the deal may not happen in the first place. So trying to get more comfortable with some of that ambiguity and leaving things a bit open, knowing that we're going to have to come back together anyway to renegotiate and agree on stuff. That's been a kind of, I think, an evolution in my approach and thinking as a BD person. Is just maybe we don't need to solve everything right now. We'll take some risk, right? We'll take some risk knowing that we might get some suboptimal solution later, right? Because as a buyer, that's when you have the leverage. Hey, you want my big check? Agree to all my provisions now. It's like, well, all right, I'm willing to take the risk that I'm going to get a worse deal on this future unknown point, but that's okay. We'll solve it, Yeah. So just that mindset has changed for me.
Who do you want at the table? Like just from a persona or titles perspective, who do you want at the table to really do the due diligence that you expect of yourself when you're exploring a deal?
So specifically around the due diligence piece of it?
Well, yeah, maybe walk us through the progression. You know what I mean? Like when you first engage, when you engage in conversation, at all, like with a company that you're interested in partnering with. And again, I'm sure that there are several different permutations, but generally, like who do you want at the table? Well, like I said, that might change as you go down the line, right? You get to a point where you want to talk to some like lead scientist, maybe, I don't know, but like walk us through sort of that progression of who's involved and who's involved in an ideal Nouhad Husseini situation.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know who coined this, but it's apropos, and a lot of people use this. This kind of want, find, get is like the rubric that all BD groups do, right? What do we want? The strategy, the find, the sourcing, the diligence, the get, the transaction piece of it. Mm-hmm. The hardest part, and what I spend most of my time and energy doing, and the most important part, is the want, right? It's the internal conversations of like, what are we even doing, and why are we doing it? And especially at Regeneron, where we don't have these master strategies and goals, and we need this many phase 3 products and this much revenue. It's purely opportunistic. It's what are we even doing? And so to your question of like, who do I want and need at the party for that part of the process? It's a champion. It's an influential person that can help me and my team like drive alignment of, yeah, this is what we want and we really mean it. We're serious, right? Because what happens a lot of times in deal making, it's like, you're half serious, and that's the worst thing possible. You run down the path with only half conviction and you change your mind. You don't know why you're doing it in the first place. And it's a disaster. The other side's pissed off. You wasted their time. They could have been doing another deal. So avoiding that to me is like goal number one. What are we doing? Let's be damn sure we know exactly what we're doing and why. And we all love it. And we're all going to be pissed if we don't get this deal. We're going to be really sad. Right. So how do we find those kinds of opportunities? So finding a senior R&D person, that's who it is in Regeneron. Those are the influential people. It's not going to be the commercial director that says we have to do this. It's some leader in R&D that says, I believe in this science. This is game-changing stuff. And the team is really, really good on the other side. That's who I want there.
Yeah.
The diligence piece is fairly straightforward, right? There's a lot of people in the industry that kind of know what they're doing and been there, done that, developed drugs. So if you run a good process there, you're probably going to discover and find out what's there. I'm not too worried about the diligence piece. And then the transaction piece, I I think the key element there, honestly, is like decision makers, because in the moment, you have to make these tough calls about, am I going to give on this point, or, what matters, right? And who has that level of judgment, who has that level of seniority and decision-making authority. Sometimes you negotiate with people that are kind of go-betweens, which is, I can't agree to this, I can't agree to this, I need to go check with my management, and you can't get anything done in that kind of situation. So you need empowered people that have the judgment and the authority to kind of sit there and, sometimes there's a deal point that's so big, like, hey, we're going to, add $100 million. Okay, I can't agree to that. I got to go back to, the executive team or whatever. But having somebody that can be a real decision maker at the table, hey, we can agree to this. If we come to a solution, like, the answer is yes, right? Having that kind of a partner, or, on our side that can do that, I think is critical.
Yeah. We're running short on time here, Nouhad. I just looked at the clock, and I was shocked at how much time we spent talking already, and I feel like we could go on and on and on. But I have a few more questions for you. I just want to wrap things up here. So one of them would be advice. The majority of our audience is new and emerging leaders of new and emerging biopharma companies. Many of whom perhaps have not experienced any opportunity at partnership or collaboration. So what advice would you have, I guess, high level advice would you have for leaders of new biopharma companies who are either, dabbling in or perhaps even being approached? What's your advice for them heading into a potential discussion around partnership?
Well, one thing I would say is just kind of, self-awareness, right? And just having a very objective try it as much as you can. It's hard, especially for kind of founders that think what they're working on is the greatest thing in the world. And and you have to be a cheerleader and a fundraiser. And that's kind of part and parcel for emerging biotech CEO, right? You don't take that job unless you're in that kind of cheerleader, optimist kind of mindset. But when it comes to kind of deal making, I think, you need to kind of check some of that at the door and just have this honest assessment. Because sometimes that's right. Sometimes you really are working on something that is, in the top 10 percentile of stuff that buyers want. And if that's the case, it's going to be a different experience and a different process and maybe different answer to your question in terms of like what to do. But in the other 90% of the case where you're onto something, it's good. But like, let's be honest, and you should be honest with yourself, it's not the top 10% crown jewels of what's out there. It's good, it's useful. But when you're in that kind of situation, my advice would be like, just get started, right? Just get something going, because, you want to, these partnerships are, as I was talking about earlier, they're living things. If it's going well, they're going to expand. There's going to be more opportunity. So, so one thing is like, try not to, sell the farm and bundle all this stuff together if you can in your first deal. Start small, get to know a partner. You're going to find maybe some of these partners aren't the right fit for you guys in one way or shape or form. And so I guess that kind of boils down to that, narrow scope for that first deal. If you're in that other 10% category, okay, fine, go big. You're going to do your big auction. You're going to find, get Merck to pay you $10 billion for your ADCs or whatever. But that's the first thing is just figure out where you are on that spectrum and have that honest assessment.
Yeah. Are there resources for companies that may not have like good seasoned business development chops heading into conversations like this or opportunities like this? Like, is this I often have conversations with CFOs for hire, for lack of a better term, right? Like contract. Are there contract brokers, negotiators in biotech that can help small companies?
I think a lot of these small companies just can benefit a lot from, there's some tremendous external legal counsel out there that are really, really sophisticated and good. And, not just from the legal side, but they've done so many deals. They know the business aspects too. So I think a senior, executive, a CEO or whoever partnering with one of the, top law firms that does a lot of these deals, that can go a long, long way. You don't necessarily need to have, a BD person there, because I think with that legal expertise, what they need is guidance from the business. What are you guys trying to achieve, CEO? What are your goals here? Help me understand what you want out of this deal. And I can kind of get that for you. So the BD person obviously is instrumental in terms of like building these relationships to begin with, right? And trying to, pitch the story and build connections and build credibility, all that's important for these small companies. But if you're asking like, hey, I'm already past that and I'm at the moment where I just need to get a deal done and get a good deal done well, I don't know that you need to go hire like a BD for hire negotiator. I think you can hire a top legal firm and then have the CEO just partner with that, attorney to work out the deal.
You mentioned earlier the scenario where, maybe a founder has an emotional attachment to his molecule or his project, his technology. There's that emotion. You also mentioned earlier that you want to get involved on projects where there's energy and momentum and excitement on your team. And you said, I want to be involved in deals where we're going to be sad if we lose them. You're talking about emotions. This is a very basic and fundamental question, but how do you do this? What advice do you have for folks to, shelve emotion when necessary in deal making? Like you strike me as you're energetic, you're animated. Like when you get on a roll with in this subject matter, you're energetic and animated. Like there's passion there. I imagine there are times where you need to set that aside before you step through the door. What do you do to just kind of chill out and do business?
It's funny. A lot of people, kind of say something different than what you just said. They kind of look at me as very cool, calm, like almost to a fault. Like they don't know how to read me. I get that kind of.
Oh, the first time, full disclosure, the first time I talked to you, as I said, Allan was adamant that I spend time with you. And the first time I talked to you, I was like, I don't know. This guy seems like I think you were walking like on the streets of New York when I was talking to you. And it was,
I was coming to the hospital with my dad.
A bit preoccupied, I know, but I was like, I don't know. But now that we've kind of gotten into the role of this conversation, like I said, I see this passion and this animation. So are you saying that generally you're just
I would say my general demeanor, I think, is like more of a cool, my emotions don't really come through in a lot of moments. Sometimes I get, upset if I feel like someone's being unreasonable or unfair or deliberately trying to cause a problem. Sure, like anybody, I'm a human. So anyway, I think part of it is just like it comes kind of naturally to my personality. But I don't know that emotions are so bad. I don't know that it's so critical that you check that at the door, as long as they're coming from the right place, right? That's where a lot of it's about. What is the motivation here? Is this a selfish motivation? Are you trying to, look, tough? Are you trying to look smart? Like that kind of stuff. We don't need that. But if you're trying to really get the best outcome for your company and you're just, okay, that's fine. Welcome that, So I try to look beyond that. And it's just like, what's driving this person? What's driving us? What is our motivations, pure and noble? And like that, yeah. I can open a lot if that's the case.
Yeah, very good. You are you? Not that I expect you to disclose this publicly on this podcast, but do you have any immediate plans for Nouhad Husseini? Are you going to stay at Regeneron for a while? Are you going to go lead your own biotech someday? Become a CEO, a founder?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting. I think at the beginning of the discussion, we talked about when I came to Regeneron and my plan, when I first got here, I thought I'd be here for like 2 or 3 years. I didn't think there was any chance I would still be at Regeneron. And my thought was I'll go there and I'll end up going to some small biotech and rise up the ranks and, be a CEO of a small biotech one day. That's kind of the natural evolution for a lot of people in my shoes.
Yeah.
But, the way things have gone at Regeneron, just the growth of the company and the unique culture here and the unique opportunity to be creative and the kinds of, like I was describing, if I was at a company where it was, these are the four things, and I was handed a playbook, go get these four things. I would be bored by now, but that's not this. The job here is like, you have this blank canvas, you have this incredible, substrate of R&D, and we have all kinds of challenges and opportunities. Help us solve those in the creative way, most creative way possible. So like as a deal maker, it's like, dream come true. I'm kind of in a playground here. So from that standpoint, it's fun. I'm not bored, and I'm always challenged, which surprises me, at this stage after doing this, for over a decade in kind of the same job. So I guess with that aspect in mind, I'm not eager to leave because this is a really rewarding and fun, place to be. Long term, I could see myself, in a senior role at a company. It's got to be the right situation. I don't look at myself as like, the true entrepreneur that's going to take some technology out of Columbia and bootstrap my way to a, $5 million seed round and, build the first employees. Like, that's not what gets me jazzed. I'm not a creator from scratch. I like solving business problems and helping science move forward, right? Helping science move forward by finding the right, financing sources and partnerships and complementary scientific expertise. Like, that's what gets me going. How do I help, see some science actually get to the end because of my ingenuity and creativity? And, if I can, if I can have a bigger impact on doing that, and it feel like, hey, my impact is even bigger, than I can have in my role at Regeneron, and something like that came along, yeah, I might be interested in doing that. But it's, again, it'd be like it'd be kind of like how I ended up at Regeneron. Something would fall in my lap and it's like, this is the perfect set of circumstances. I can't say no to it. So it's possible.
Yeah. Very good. Well, like I said, I didn't expect you to tell me that you had imminent plans to go do something else, but I appreciate the transparency there. This has been terrific. Like, this has been a great getting to know you conversation, and I think you've also shared a ton of good insight just into the thought processes around deal making. I thank you, one, for entertaining my often ill-formed questions. And I think I'd like to have you back on the pod sometime soon, and talk a little bit more strategically about some of the things that new and emerging biotechs could be taking advantage of in the market right now, or discussion around some of the market conditions that are impacting the decisions that they're making. If you're game for that. But in the meantime, I think this is terrific. Like, this is super, super insightful conversation. I appreciate you coming on.
Well, I appreciate you having me. Hopefully the audience thought it was interesting hearing a little bit about my background, and hopefully there's some good tidbits in there. But I'd be happy to come back on and keep the conversation going down the road. That'd be fun. I
appreciate it. Thanks, Nouhad.
All right. Thank you.
So that's Regeneron SVP and Head of Business Development and Corporate Strategy, Nouhad Husseini. I'm Matt Pillar, and this is the Business of Biotech. We're produced by Bioprocess Online and sponsored by Cytiva, whose support of new and emerging biopharma companies is on full display at cytiva.com/emerging biotech. If you like listening in on conversations with leaders like Nouhad, subscribe to the Business of Biotech podcast and sign up for our newsletter at bioprocessonline.com/BOB. Also, be sure to leave us a review. Let us know how we're doing. And as always, thanks for listening.